On the country's zoological gardens, animals that have grown accustomed to scores of visitors are facing social challenges since the lockdown began. Our reporter Ofentse Setimo has more.
Visitors are a prominent feature of zoos all over the world, but that hasn't been the case due to COVID-19, as government urged all local citizens to stay away and keep a social distance. That has affected the bottom line of some zoos all over the world, but we're going to find out here at the Pretoria Zoo what has been the effect of the COVID-19 lockdown. Joining me now is Craig Allenby, the spokesperson of the National Zoo, who's going to give us a background as to how the impact of the COVID-19 has been on the zoo. Thank you so much for your time, sir. If you can just tell us, since the lockdown began, what has been the impact, especially on the bottom line for the zoo?
Well, the National Zoo is part of South African National Biodiversity Institute, which is an entity of the Department of Environmental Affairs, Forestry and Fishery. So we do get a core grant from them. So that core grant has been able to maintain our operations here at the zoo. So we're not at the moment feeling the crunch of the visitors. But this is something that we're going to have to make up as soon as the lockdown has been lifted, because we are dependent upon our visitors to come and visit the National Zoo. But our core grant is keeping us going. All our animals are being fed, they're getting all the right nutrients, and from a health perspective, our animals are actually not affected by the COVID virus.
Okay. And we understand that some researchers have actually done research on the interaction between the animals and the patrons on the zoo. Some saying that there is a positive and neutral and sometimes a negative impact depending on the background and the past experience of the animals themselves. Are there any animals that have been affected to that regard?
Most of the animals that we have here at the National Zoo were actually born here, so they're habituated to people. But you'll find that we use an hands-off approach, so we don't physically work with the animals. So they find that actually humans are quite neutral. We also allow their night quarters to be open on a daily basis. So if they feel that the visitors are too much, they can actually go into the night rooms and have some peace and quiet. But at the moment, I would say neutral is how most of the animals are. They might be a little bit more forthcoming to have a look at you. But neutral is mainly what their behavior is.
Oh, okay. And how do you keep them occupied, especially some of those that are used to people actually passing through here, since this is the main thoroughfare of the zoo and everything? I saw even the giraffe, once we got here, it's actually hooked on us. It's actually been on us all this time. But how do you keep them engaged during the time that there's not a lot of activity here at the zoo?
Zoos have a program called environmental enrichment. And what environmental enrichment does, it tries to stimulate the behavior of the animals. So you'll give them fresh scents to interact with, different type of foods to interact with, hide their food. So all of that keeps them psychologically busy and also prevents boredom. So we do that across all the species in the zoo, this environmental enrichment.
So if it weren't for the grant that you received from DAF, what would have been the scenario? We've heard internationally that some zoos are actually struggling with nutrients and with upkeep because the funds are actually being depleted as there's no patrons coming into the zoo.
Look, if it wasn't for the core grant from DEF, we would be in huge problems. We wouldn't be able to feed our animals because we don't have reserves. But the the core grant that we received from Environmental Affairs, Forestry and Fishery is really keeping us going. So we have no problems in feeding our animals and giving them the required nutrients. So we're not compromising on the welfare of our animals at all at this stage.
And normally during holidays you'd find that the patrons, lots of them actually come to the zoo. We've just passed the Easter holidays just now. Are there any projections in terms of the losses that you would have made?
Yes, there are. Obviously we have to manage our budget and see where we can cut back. But again, at the moment there's no compromising of the welfare. And as soon as the lockdown is lifted, we'll have to do a lot of marketing to get visitors back at the zoo.
Okay. Thank you very much, sir. That was Mr. Craig Allenby from the Pretoria Zoo, actually saying the hard work still awaits them to ensure that patrons will come following the end of the lockdown, as their bottom line has also been hard hit, as there hasn't been any patrons visiting the center. He also says if it wasn't for the grant that they received from the Department of the DAF, things would have been very difficult for the zoo. And with us from here, it's back to studio.